Soot-laden lanterns flickered in the corridor, casting trembling shadows on the walls. The air smelled of must and parchment, a faint tang of decay that teased the nostrils like a secret no one dared to speak aloud. A battered wooden sign, half broken and hanging by a rusty chain, marked the entrance. The sign's words were so faded as to be nearly illegible, but a determined squint revealed something about a repository of knowledge. A single door, ancient and wrought with creeping black iron vines, stood ajar as though beckoning any passerby to venture inside. Many had come through that entrance, whispering of the wondrous labyrinth of books within, but few ever seemed to walk back out. I had heard rumors of that enchanted place since I was a child. My grandmother told tales of a library whose shelves meandered beyond the mortal world, each volume containing a living fragment of the souls who had disappeared within. People insisted these were old wives' stories, cautionary fables to keep children from wandering off at dusk. Yet here I was, driven by a compulsion I could not name, stepping over the threshold as the wind hissed through the door. The moment I crossed into the main hall, the temperature dropped. My breath curled out of my mouth in thin plumes, dissolving into motes of dust that danced in the lantern light. At first glance, I thought I had stepped into a grand reading room, centuries past its prime. Ebony carved shelves loomed overhead, stacked to precarious heights with leather-bound tomes. The floor was paved with stones worn smooth by countless footsteps that came before me. Far above, a vaulted ceiling whispered of lost grandeur. But there was an unsettling hush beneath the hush, an incongruent sense that, beyond the usual silence of a library, something was listening. I peered down a narrow aisle, flanked on both sides by shelves towering so tall they threatened to kiss the eaves of the ceiling. The dim glow from the lantern skimmed across the spines of books in 1,000 shades of brown and burgundy. Some volumes were so ancient their titles had been eaten away by time. Others were pristine, as if freshly bound. My stomach tightened when I leaned in to read a title on a battered spine at the corner of my vision and heard a faint murmur. It was as though the book itself released a trembling sigh, fluttering its pages in an almost imperceptible movement. Startled, I pulled back, swallowing my fear and forced my feet to keep moving. A caretaker emerged from behind a corner, wearing a dark cloak layered with dust, as if it had been woven from cobwebs and shadows themselves. His face was pallid, save for the deep circles under his eyes. With a bony hand, he gestured for me to follow him deeper into the library. His silence was oppressive, every footstep echoing off the stone floor in a slow, hypnotic cadence. I sensed that speaking aloud might break a taboo hidden within these walls, so I remained wordless, clasping my own hands to keep them from trembling. Eventually, the caretaker led me to what might have once been a reading alcove, though any comfort it possessed was long gone. A single, moth-eaten armchair faced a small wooden table where a candle guttered in a tarnished holder. The caretaker bowed his head slightly, as though paying respects to the occupant of the chair, though it was painfully empty. Then he pointed to an alcove set with shelves whose books were smaller but appeared somehow more menacing. Their spines glistened in the low light, as if bound in skins that should never have touched a printing press. Gazing upon them made my skin prickle with unease. Before I could question him, the caretaker vanished into the gloom. Left on my own, I clutched the book that had brought me here in the first place, an heirloom from my grandmother's attic. Its cracked leather cover was stamped with an image of a labyrinth, and inside was a single page referencing the name of this library, a footnote about escaping the labyrinth, penned by a long-forgotten scholar. I'd never found another copy of the text, nor any other mention of the place. Determined to learn more, I approached the dank shelves. I felt drawn to the volumes, as if magnetized. One volume in particular caught my eye, a narrow tome bound in a shimmering black material that reflected my face like a dark mirror. I pulled it from the shelf, and a thrill shot through my veins. Its pages crackled with static, the faint sizzling noise reminding me strangely of hushed whispers. The text began in a neat script, describing a traveler who had once come to the library seeking forbidden knowledge. As I read, I could feel a second presence in my mind, someone else's memories blossoming behind my eyelids. I saw glimpses of a man with ink-stained palms, wandering endless corridors of shelves, hearing soft murmurs echo his own name. And then he vanished. The final lines dissolved into a swirling script I couldn't understand. I closed the book, heart pounding. A quiet moan rippled along the shelves behind me. It grew in volume, like the hum of tormented echoes. With the book still clutched to my chest, I turned around, stepping away from the small alcove. The library seemed to expand in every direction, as though it breathed and shifted in response to my intrusion. Another corridor branched off to the right, beckoning. Despite my earlier dread, I found my curiosity guiding me forward. My footsteps sounded muffled on the ancient stone, swallowed by the hush. Along the corridor's length, iron sconces held candles that flickered, casting elongated silhouettes of me across the floor. I tried not to dwell on the shape my shadow took, stretched and warped, as if an invisible hand was trying to drag me deeper. Halfway down, I stopped, hearing the faint scratch of quill on parchment. Ducking into a small archway, I found a modest study room that housed a single oak desk and a leather high-backed chair. Someone was sitting there, turned away from me. Light from a lantern fell across the desk, where I glimpsed a stack of tattered parchment. My eyelids flew open wide, adrenaline flooding my veins. I approached cautiously, forcing myself to place one foot in front of the other. Drawing closer, I saw the figure more clearly. A man wearing an old-fashioned waistcoat. Unlike the caretaker, his skin was not pallid but marbled with the color of rotting parchment. His hair was the hue of old cobwebs, and his exposed hands were skeletal. He scrawled something on a piece of parchment. My attempt to speak or alert him to my presence died in my throat. Without turning, he spoke first, a voice that sounded as though it came from beneath layers of dust. "You have the black-bound tome," he said, his pen never halting. "Beware what you read within these pages. Each story is a life, and each life still lingers, waiting." My fingers tightened around the tome, the weight of it pulsing like a living heart. "Why do the books whisper?" I managed to ask, voice quivering. "And is there a way out?" He paused his writing, turning one cloudy eye upon me. "They whisper because the library has trapped their stories, trapped them. The only way out, they say, is through the index of lost souls." His face drooped with sorrow. "But no one knows where the index lies. Perhaps it isn't a place at all, but a secret." A surge of hopelessness bathed me in cold sweat. I stepped closer to see what he'd been penning. The page bore a list of names, each with blotches of ink that swirled like shadows around the letters. Some I recognized from my grandmother's stories: travelers, scholars, the superstitious, the brave, the foolhardy. Countless individuals who disappeared into the folds of this labyrinthine library. "You've been writing them down?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the persistent hush. His expression was mournful, recording them more accurately. "They cry out through the pages, you see. Their voices swirl in the corridors. I am bound to preserve their existence." Then, as if frightened by his own words, he plunged his quill into the ink pot and returned to his frantic scribbling. I left him to his grim work. My mind reeled with the realization that for every traveler who became lost here, a new book might be formed, or an existing one was awakened. Thick with dread, I pressed on, letting an inexplicable pull guide me through a labyrinth of shelves. Naked stone arches led to more shelves, as though each turn was a puzzle contrived by a malevolent will that enjoyed confounding human curiosity. My journey through the twisting corridors brought me to a rotunda in the heart of the library, an eerie clearing where massive shelves circled a dais. The silence pressed thicker here, making the hair prickle on the back of my neck. In the middle stood a plinth carved from black marble, holding a gargantuan ledger bound in copper filigree. Its cover was adorned with strange glyphs that seemed to squirm under my gaze. Candlelight glimmered off the metallic edges of the filigree, giving it an otherworldly sheen. I approached tentatively and brushed my fingertips along the spine. The copper designs were alarmingly warm, as though they breathed. Suddenly a voice seemed to emanate from inside the ledger, as deep as an echo in a cave. "Open," it murmured, with an insistent compulsion that vibrated through my bones. Against my better judgment, I lifted the cover. Pages of thick vellum lay within, each inscribed with lines of cramped, spidery text. On one page, I recognized the name of the man from the reading alcove. On another, the caretaker's name, half rubbed out. Farther down, to my horror, was my own name, scrawled in fresh black ink. Next to it was a date. My blood ran cold. I slammed the ledger shut, heart beating wildly, and stumbled back. I expected the dais to vanish or the ledger to be gone when I looked up again, but it remained, unmovable as a monolith. Resolving not to lose myself to panic, I remembered the caretaker's pantomimed guidance toward the smaller alcove. Those books had a menacing aura, but also, perhaps, a clue to an escape. After all, it was in that direction that he had silently steered me. Retracing my steps, I navigated corridors that seemed oddly changed. The library toyed with orientation, a hallway leading where it had not led before, a spiral staircase appearing without reason. When at last I returned to the smaller alcove, I found it deserted save for the flickering candles along the walls. The caretaker was nowhere in sight, but I sensed lingering traces of his presence, like footprints that never fade. Gathering my courage, I scanned the spines, searching for anything referencing an index of lost souls or a method of release. A whisper of wind rustled the pages in one corner of the shelf, drawing my attention to a slender volume. Its spine bore no title. Curious, I removed it carefully, letting the candlelight reveal its etched design. An intricate labyrinth, much like the one stamped on my grandmother's heirloom. I opened it. Empty pages greeted my eyes. No words, no drawings, only the faint scent of dust and something far darker. A gust of air cold as midnight swirled around me, and an unearthly voice sighed from the blank parchment. "Write your story, or lose it." My hands trembled. I rummaged in my bag for a pen, ignoring the voice in my head that screamed to leave this place. Carefully, I laid the black-bound tome on a nearby table so that I could rest the blank volume beside it. The black-bound tome quivered under my touch, as though it recognized its companion. Encouraged, yet frightened by the synergy, I pressed the pen to the first page of the empty book. I wrote my name, half expecting it to vanish before my eyes. It remained, each letter forming a tiny black shape against the page. As the ink dried, I turned the page to write more, and the previously blank leaves began to swirl with gray shapes, flickering glimpses of corridors, shelves, faces. It was as though the library was imprinting itself on the page. Transfixed, I wrote of the caretaker, the ledger, and the names I had seen. I recounted the tale of the black-bound tome whispering in my ears. With every sentence, my memory sharpened, as though I siphoned the intangible fragments of the library's grip onto the page. The swirling images glowed faintly, and then settled into place with each word, until I had a coherent story of what had happened so far. When I reached the end of the empty volume, I realized that no more blank pages remained. A flush of fear coursed through me. "What now?" I whispered, half to the book, half to myself. The edges of the volume pulsed as though it possessed a heartbeat. Then the black-bound tome fluttered open, revealing anew the cryptic script I'd glimpsed earlier. I watched in astonishment as my handwriting began to appear beneath the strange letter. 2 narratives, one ancient and indecipherable, the other freshly penned, melded into a single tapestry of words. The faint glow around the text intensified, and I felt the entire library vibrate. A scrambling noise erupted behind me. Whirling around, I saw a figure emerge from the gloom. A gaunt man with torn clothing, hair matted with dust, eyes wild with terror. "Have you found it?" he rasped, voice trembling. "Have you found the index?" He peered desperately at the books on the table, only to recoil when the black-bound tome unleashed a low groan that seemed to reverberate through the rafters. I'm not sure, I stuttered, chest tight. These books, they're merging somehow. They might show a way out, or they might be a trap. I don't know. His eyes darted to me, then to the swirling text. In response, a surge of movement flickered across the pages, as if thousands of words were rearranging themselves. He let out a pained moan, covering his ears. Too many voices, he muttered. They speak of doom. They speak of empty corridors. They say this place has no end. Despite the fear, I latched onto an idea. What if the voices are only half the truth? What if the stories in these books can be changed if we take control of them? I remembered the mysterious phrase, "Write your story, or lose it." Perhaps this library subsisted on others' narratives, but if someone reclaimed their own tale, they might carve a path out of the labyrinth. Before he could respond, the caretaker reappeared. His hood was thrown back, revealing a face drawn in anguished lines. In one skeletal hand, he clutched a battered quill. He gestured urgently at the black-bound tome. A silent plea burned in his hollow eyes, as though he too yearned for release. With trembling hands, I tore a blank scrap of parchment from my bag, one of the last I had. I scrawled a single sentence. We found a way to escape the library. Beneath it, in smaller script, I wrote, The shadows parted, the corridors led out, and we stepped into daylight. Heart-pounding, I pressed the snippet of parchment to the open page of the black-bound tome. For an excruciating moment, nothing happened. Then a breeze gusted around us, spinning dust in a vortex. The caretaker's quill fell from his fingers as the old man by my side crouched, covering his face. Pages fluttered in a frantic crescendo, and the library seemed to moan in protest. I could feel an unseen tension rising, threatening to swat us down. Nonetheless, I forced myself to envision the library's corridors rearranging themselves into a clear path, guided by the lines I had written. The black-bound tome absorbed the scrap of parchment, the edges dissolving into swirling shadows that sank beneath the text. With a heartbeat-like thrum, the pages stilled. I inhaled, nerves raw, uncertain if the attempt had succeeded. But as I lifted my head, I noticed the candles behind the caretaker flicker and elongate, as if the walls were shifting. Beyond the shelves, a corridor that hadn't been there before stretched away, bathed in a faint, silvery light. It looked new, untainted by the gloom that dominated the rest of the library. With faint hope, I gestured for both men to follow. The caretaker hovered at my side, quivering. The other man clung to a battered book with both hands, fear etched into every tight line of his face. Step by step, we traversed the corridor. The suffocating hush lifted into a more natural stillness, the gloom receding as a pale glow fell across us. Ahead, a set of large oak doors came into view, free of the monstrous iron vines that choked the main entrance. Something within me whispered that these doors led outside, or at least to somewhere beyond the library's endless night. The caretaker's bony fingers found my arm. His voice came out rasping with emotion. I've guarded these halls for so long, I cannot remember how life outside feels. Will it let me free? Out cracked his stoic exterior, revealing a deep, lingering sorrow. I don't know, I admitted softly. But we must try. Gathering my courage, I reached for the door. My hand felt tiny against the massive handle of dark oak. For a heartbeat, I feared that it would be locked or would disintegrate under my touch. But it turned smoothly, almost welcoming. Light flooded in. Pale, but unmistakably daylight. I emerged first, eyes stinging as I adjusted. The caretaker stumbled out after me, his ancient cloak trailing behind him. Finally, the gaunt man peered past the threshold, as though expecting the corridor to drag him back. However, no supernatural force yanked him inside. The door gently closed behind us, leaving us in a misty courtyard. Broken columns jutted from the ground, and climbing ivy wrapped them in a green shroud. The sky above, though overcast, was infinitely more comforting than anything the library's vaulted ceiling had to offer. For a long moment, we drank in fresh air. Tears slid down the caretaker's leathery cheeks, and the other man clutched at the grass as if needing proof of its reality. My gaze strayed to the battered black-bound tome, still clutched in my shaking hands. Though we had stepped outside, its presence remained heavy, as if some spirit within it yearned for closure. Part of me wondered what would happen if I opened it again. Would it pull me back? Or had we rewritten our destinies enough to break the cycle? The character staggered forward, removing his hood entirely. His face, once a portrait of pallor, bloomed with a fragile flush, as though color returned to him after centuries of monotone existence. At last, he managed a trembling smile. I think we have broken the binding. We are free." Yet a distant whisper prickled at my awareness, carrying from behind the sealed door. Countless voices, stifled by the stone walls, murmured faintly. Not all who were trapped had escaped in our wake. The memory of the ledger flickered in my mind's eye, the countless names, including mine. Perhaps, in some future moment, another seeker would find those pages, or the ledger would birth a new volume. The library's labyrinthine hunger might not end so easily. I turned the black-bound tome in my hands, pressing its cover to my chest. If it whispered stories, it might also whisper a warning. Finally, I exhaled and let my arms settle at my sides. We were outside. As exhaustion swept through me, I caught the caretaker's eye. He nodded in silent solidarity, then took a few experimental steps away from the library door. The grass did not dissolve beneath his feet. The sky did not melt away. We truly stood, all three of us, in whatever passed for freedom now. Yet dread tinged our reprieve. The battered quill lay in the caretaker's limp hand. The other man still gripped his battered volume, as though it were a lifeline. I cradled the black-bound tome. A subtle hum emanated from within, reminiscent of a distant heartbeat. The library might have lost its immediate claim on us, but its presence remained, like scars beneath fragile skin. The three of us locked eyes momentarily, acknowledging the uneasy truth that our stories were forever entwined with the labyrinth of shelves and the volumes that told tales of the vanished. In a single, silent resolution, we carried ourselves onward. Mist-veiled whatever landscape lay beyond the courtyard, as though nature itself struggled to reassert its dominion over a cursed boundary. Our first few steps were cautious, but each subsequent one grew steadier. Gradually, the gloom of the library receded to a memory behind us, overshadowed by the soft hush of the world outside. The caretaker let out a ragged breath, as though tasting freedom on his tongue for the first time. The gaunt man raised his eyes to the sky, and I, walking between them, kept my hand on the black-bound tome, a relic from a place where all stories existed in perpetual twilight. I felt certain the library would call to me again. Perhaps it would call to any who had a thirst for forbidden knowledge. The labyrinth was not just made of shelves and stone, but of words that transcended time, words that preyed on mortal curiosity, devouring those who ventured too far. Even so, the final line I had written still lit a small flame within me. We found a way to escape the library. For now, at least, that hope was real. Whatever might come next, I resolved to never again let a story I wrote be shaped solely by the library's haunting whispers from beyond the pages.